While retirement is generally seen as a time of relaxation and self-focus, God calls us to love, serve, and help others for a lifetime. He has been preparing us for this retirement season literally our entire lives. In retirement, countless Christians enter a state of spiritual dormancy, not knowing how they are called to have an impact for God's kingdom. The Retirement Reformation seeks to encourage and empower the 50 million Christians approaching or in retirement to embrace the calling God has been preparing in them. When the world says it's time to stop, you can begin to have your greatest impact. Welcome to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation, where our goal is to journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him.
Reaching out to the 50 million Christ followers who are already in retirement or fast approaching retirement, you've tuned into iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg, along with the founder of the Retirement Reformation, Bruce Brinesma. Bruce, we want people to check us out online on retirementreformation.org and on Facebook, Retirement Reformation, but you've got a new fancy schmancy thing that's on our phones. What is it?
We have an app.
There's an app for that. What are we going to find? How are we going to find this app on the Apple Store?
Well, you go to the Apple Store or the App Store and you just simply put in Retirement Reformation. You'll find it there, and when you download it, you'll be able to connect with essentially all the information that's available on our website. And so you're sitting for a minute at the doctor's office, you're at a red light, you're somewhere and you're on your phone. You're able to then connect with everything about the Retirement Reformation, including the Retirement Reformation Manifesto. As a matter of fact, if we were on our phones right now and we pulled up the app, we looked at that and we'd poke on Retirement Reformation Manifesto, we would scroll down and we would see the introduction and we would see all of the 10 different items that are there, and including the one that we're going to talk about today, the 10th of the 10 of the Retirement Reformation Manifesto. And the title of that is Advocacy.
Oh, you took the winds right out of my sails. That's right. For the last 10 podcasts, we've been talking about the Retirement Reformation Manifesto. Today is the highlight of the last principle, which is advocacy. So, Bruce, if advocacy is our, what do you mean? What do you mean advocacy? When you say advocacy, I mean, that has actually got some political connotations to it. What do you mean with regards to the Retirement Reformation?
Whenever you discover something that is impacting your life, fit all kinds of different categories. Could be a new recipe, could be a TV program, could be an app that you find that has value, but something that kind of gets you excited because it has an emotional content. What is it that you then do? You shut down, you go home, you crawl under the covers, you wrap your arms around yourself and say, I'm not telling anybody about this. No, that's not what happens at all. As a matter of fact, whoever the next person is that God puts in your path, you're going to tell them about it because you're excited about it and it's made a difference and it's changed and it is in the process of changing your life. Now, when that happens, what is it that you really want to do if the person that you ran into happens to be one of your friends? What would you like them to do? Man, you would like them to join you in the journey of discovering meaning and purpose and joy and what we talked about in our last podcast, service, and all of the other 9 focuses of the Retirement Reformation Manifesto. And so advocacy is the natural expression of the joy that comes when God has put you in the process of something that has changed your life, and you can't help yourself but to tell someone else about it.
All right. So as you've told the audience, you're 79 years old. Your retirement age, yet you're not really retired. You're still transitioning the sale of your business, you're doing your transition perpetuation plan. You're really running hard and heavy with Retirement Reformation. So you're hardly retired by the American standard of it. But you have an understanding of retirement that most people don't, that you understand that God has called you to this, that you've got a calling that you're not done, that your retirement years are just another season. Who advocated on your behalf to help you understand this? Because somebody had to whack you upside the head, because you're like me, you're a driver, you're going. Somebody had to get your attention. Somebody was an advocate for you, Bruce, to help you understand this. Who was that, and what did it look like?
Well, it was a negative set of advocates, if you wish, in that I saw over the last 30 years, the number of people who were not prepared for retirement financially. But then as I looked more deeply into that, and the Holy Spirit was the one that really whacked me upside the head and said, hey, check that out. Why is that? And what I learned was that, in fact, if your why isn't big enough, the how doesn't matter. And that led me to an understanding that amongst these 50 million Christians that you talk about in our intro, that in fact, when you ask them, what are you going to do in retirement? And they come up with this magical answer of nothing, that there had to be something that God has planned. And so it was in that struggling to find the answers to those questions that the passion erupted to be able to both understand, communicate about, and begin a movement that in fact will engage others. Now, let me just talk about that movement for just a second, because a program or a product, you sell it and you want people to buy it. A movement is an invitation to be engaged in something that will make a difference to you, and you can't help but tell someone else. And so that's what creates a movement. And so to our audience today, the invitation that I make is to find that advocacy piece within the Retirement Reformation that can excite you and that you can't help but tell someone else. That's the way our movement will grow through each of our steps of advocacy.
I think we need to advocate for the people that are listening and talk about calling, because there's so many people who have been told, the highlight of retirement is to do nothing. That's what they're like. What are you going to do tomorrow? Your first day of retirement? Nothing. I don't have to get up when I don't want to get up. I don't have to drive when I don't want to drive. I don't have to listen to anybody tell me what to do. I'm going to do nothing. And that may actually be good for some people for the first month.
Well, maybe some people for the first year. I mean, right. You may need to heal.
Right. You might be exhausted from it all. But eventually, nothing gets boring. And it starts to destroy you. And some people, as we talked about a story. It was in Bruce Gordon when we interviewed him in the last podcast. He talked about a guy who got laid off early, or got forced into early retirement, and the guy went back for the next year into the parking lot of his office building and just cried because he missed working so much. But there's a calling on people's life, Bruce, and that calling, as you've said so well, doesn't end when we retire. How do we know? How can we help our listeners? How can we be an advocate for them to help them understand what that calling is? What does Retirement Reformation have to offer?
Well, it has a couple of things. First of all, it has the acknowledgement that this issue exists, and so there's a beginning point. Second, that there is a unique call to you. As a matter of fact, let's just be reminded of our Bible verse, John 15:16, where Jesus said, "You did not call me, I called you, and I chose you." For what reason? I chose you, called you, empowered you in order to bear much fruit. And so calling and fruit bearing are inextricably tied together. So how do I know about my individual calling? I can refer you to two books. Number one is on our website called Charting Your Course. It's a simple and easy book to be able to work your way through that will help you to be able to pull out from your experience, your understanding, and encourage you to be able to come out with an understanding of what is your future course, at least for the next stage of your life. Secondly, we'll have coming out, and by the time this podcast airs, I believe, we will have that out as a study guide, an 11-week small group study guide, where we can come together in a small group with a leader, and we can work through and answer those questions to be able to see what is the trajectory of the journey that God has for us. That is calling. So we have the words of Jesus. We have the reality that each one of us knows that deep in our heart that trying to bring meaning and purpose out of leisure is a fool's errand. that when we find meaning and purpose, that work becomes a joy, that we can impact others, and we have a process that our listeners can actually go through that will help them to specifically identify what are those and what are next steps.
All right. When we come back, I want to talk more about this advocacy thing, but we've got an interview coming up and it's going to blow people's minds. So just stay tuned to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation. We've got a guest coming up. It's going to shock you. So hang on. We'll be right back.
There is a move of God in our country called the Retirement Reformation. It's not enough to sit in the grandstands of life, watching the days go by with leisure as a reward. Join us back on the playing field of life, discovering God's plan for you and building purpose and intentionality into every day. Go to retirementreformation.org and click on the Resources tab. Check out our prayer walk and start ministering to your neighbors through prayer today. Connect with your ongoing journey by downloading the prayer app at retirementreformation.org. Click on the Resources tab. Make the journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him. Now, let's get back to the show.
Hey, welcome back to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation. You know, every segment too, Bruce, we bring in a special guest. Somebody's got a great story to share. I'm going to flip this on you today. We have interviewed all these great people. This is our 27th podcast. We interviewed you and Judy for the very first one, but a lot of people haven't gone back and listened to that. I think people need to hear a little bit of your story because even since we did that first podcast, a lot has changed in your life. So today's segment 2 guest is Bruce Brinesma, the founder of the Retirement Reformation. Bruce, you know, a lot of times we ask our guests, how long have you been retired? But the answer for you is, I'm not retired. I'm still working full time. Bruce, you've got an understanding of what the retirement years are, just another phase in life. What has God told you that your call is during your retirement years? Certainly the first segment of your retirement years.
Well, the first segment well, let me just go back up a minute.
Okay.
When people ask me, when are you going to retire? I am 79. So the people ask, when are you going to retire? Here's my answer to them, Jim. I already am. I'm doing exactly what God wants me to do, with whom He wants me to do it, and how He wants me to do it. That's the single best definition of retirement that I can come up with. And so when you put that into a personal context, is to be able to, I've been blessed that God has continued to take me on a series of journeys. Some of them are directly connected, some of them are tangential and then feed back in, to be really concerned about His kingdom. And there's the beginning of the passion. Understanding what is God's kingdom. And it's here and it's now. It's yes, we have eternity with Him, but He said it's now. And so how, in fact, am I able and have been equipped to be able to impact not only my own thinking, but the thinking of others that will help them along their journey to be able to help build the kingdom. So this whole idea of kingdom building, fruit bearing, those are the things that are conceptual, but bring the passion out of me.
But for you, you decided, you know what? I want more people to know what I figured out, that retirement isn't about doing nothing. It isn't about playing golf every day or playing tennis or pickleball.
It's also not just about money.
And it's not just about money. And a lot of times people spend all their lives saving for retirement, but they never had a spending plan. That's something that's a disaster. And so they hoard their money, or they're so nervous about their money, they don't go and spend it and enjoy it. I want you to get transparent for a little bit. Pull back those layers, the ogre layers, and get down into the deep Bruce Brinesma. And what are you doing to have fun in your retirement? You always break out on the shows that there's 3 sections to retirement years. The first 10 years, which are active years, and then it starts to transition to, at the end, you can be a wisdom share, but a lot of times maybe you're not, your body's worn out, but your mind is still fine. What's that middle segment called again? Mentoring. Okay. So what are you doing to have fun right now? When you and Judy check out of Envoy Financial and check out of Retirement Reformation, what do you do?
Well, what we do is we love to travel. Of course, it's a little bit hard with COVID. Matter of fact, just about every night when I come home now, Judy says, well, I found this great place where we need to go. We've been in 63 countries around the world, so part of, and by a combination of ministry and just enjoy travel. And a friend of mine has a cabin. And so for the last year, probably 4 times we've gone up to this beautiful cabin in southern Colorado and just simply enjoyed each other and enjoyed what God had to say through us as I continue to, study his word and pray. And so that time of peace is something that's new for us from a peripatetic lifetime. We also, God has prompted over the years to help start businesses that support ministry. And so actually that sounds like work, and it is work, but it's work that brings joy. So for example, we have a coffee plantation in Laos. There's another whole subject. We've started the Bible translation for 4 different languages in that country. Those are the things that I really get excited about. And it's fits into those places that aren't directly involved with the Retirement Reformation or Envoy Financial or any of those things. We're also in the process of envisioning starting a private equity fund to be able to invest in companies, in tech companies that will impact the kingdom. And I could go on for a couple of hours about the excitement of that. So discovering new and different ways that the resources and capacities that God has given me to be able to apply it. And I am surprised virtually every day, every week, about the new things that he brings that in fact we can either understand, absorb, or be an advocate about to others.
See,
what gives me fun. Do I play golf? No. Judy and I work out every morning at 5:00. We get in a car and drive over to the gym and do our workout. And so we're home by, probably about 10 after 6 or so, 5 days a week. And so, things to be able to be in good shape physically, be in good shape mentally, grow spiritually, connect with God's wisdom. That's what buzzes us up.
So it's not like you're eliminating things off your plate. You're still piling new stuff on your plate. I mean, you're not going, Lord, I'm kind of slowing down here. You're going, Lord, well, what else you got? What else you got for me? Come on, let's go. What do you got for me, Lord?
And he always does. The most exciting thing is looking out the front window of your car to see what in fact is there. I have a friend of mine who is in his spiritual journey. What he does is he gets in the car and he just drives and sees where God takes him. Well, there's a metaphor for, I think, the life of that is fulfilled, that has meaning and purpose, that continues to be exciting and you can be passionate about. Whether it's physically getting in the car and driving to see what's going to happen, or in fact, as we are talking here, the things that God explains to us at this point. Let me give you an example. Yesterday, having a conversation with my staff, and we were talking about, what are the unusual things that God puts in front of us that we could do? And one of the things that came out of that conversation is, there are churches dying all over the country. They're just dying, and for all kinds of reasons. What would happen if, in fact, we could identify those churches that are dying with churches that are growing and living and be able to match them up to be able to build the kingdom that way? I never thought about that before.
I've seen it done.
That's an exciting idea.
I've seen it
Somebody
done.
needs to do that.
There's a church out of Clearwater, Florida, Calvary Baptist Church. They just call themselves Calvary now because nobody says they're Baptist anymore. And they were looking for dying churches all over the Tampa Bay region, and they were adopting them as remote location churches and helping revive them and remodel them. And what a fantastic little neighborhood churches that were. I watched them take over one church that had 8 people left, and the youngest member was 80. And they grabbed that church and they revitalized it. They grabbed all those old members and incorporated them into a younger congregation and saved that church. There's a model for that. I love that. Wow, there's another thing for your plate. I love that.
There we go.
There we go.
But to be able to be an encouragement about that and be able to speak about that in this kind of an environment, God may have someone who's listening to this podcast. It could be tomorrow, could be 6 months from now, could be a year from now, who will go, that's what God's calling me to do. They just know it. They recognize it. And so, so that's all part, Jim, of what it means to be an advocate, is to be able to share God's wisdom, opportunities, insights, ways of doing things that fit within the framework and that you can evaluate using the fruits of the Spirit, and to be able to know whether, in fact, this is an idea from God or this is not. And then to be able to apply that in our own lives. And it's important to know what to say no to. But if you hear a good idea, anytime it's good to share it.
And when we come back, we're going to jump back into principle number 10, advocacy. Bruce, thanks for sharing a little piece of your life. We're going to have to keep doing this every once in a while because people need to know who Bruce Brinesma really is. You're listening to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation. We'll be right back.
You've spent decades making financial plans for your retirement years. But have you done any life planning? God has a plan for your life, and it includes living out your faith in your retirement years with meaning, purpose, and intentionality. Go out to retirementreformation.org and click on our Resources tab. Download a copy of the book, Charting Your Course, and get started with life planning today. Simply download a copy of Charting Your Course at retirementreformation.org. Make the journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him. Now let's get back to the show.
Hey, welcome back to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation. I'm Jim Brangenberg, your host, along with Bruce Brinesma, the founder of Retirement Reformation. Please check us out online, retirementreformation.org. Tons of resources out there. And if you maybe don't have a computer or you've got a tablet in front of you or an iPad or something like that, we've got an app for that. Retirement Reformation, grab our app, and you got access to all the resources we have on our website, but in a mobile form. Retirement Reformation on Facebook, in the App Store, or retirementreformation.org. Bruce, we're talking about advocacy, and it reads as principle number 10 of the Retirement Reformation Manifesto. It reads like this: advocacy. We resolve to encourage others to find meaning and purpose following God's design. Our conviction leads us to shine God's light on each of our paths, pointing to lives filled with meaning and purpose. Our passion and convictions lead us to encourage all to live lives filled with meaning and purpose. Each of us, including all pastors, ministry leaders, and Jesus followers, which I think all pastors and ministry leaders are Jesus followers, are called to this retirement reformation. A new opportunity exists to change the world for Jesus, bear fruit in His name, and experience the abundant life in Him. Advocacy. Bruce, our country needs the retired Christ followers of America to be an advocate for our country. Our country desperately needs those wisdom bearers, 60 and older, to reinvest in this country, to remind our country what it's made of. How can the average retiree be an advocate for other retirees? What do you see happening?
I think there's two things. First of all, to recognize the need in your own life and to be comfortable with that role of sharing what it is that is meaningful and valuable to you. Then when we put that together to be able to identify in others the opportunities that they have and to be able to speak into that. It may be skills or talents or abilities or opportunities that you don't connect to. They are different than who you are. But God gives us the ability to be able to be an advocate for His role in their life, like it is His role is in your life. And so to be able to change that, who were the first advocates that Jesus chose? Well, we learn in Luke that He went up to the mountain. He had a whole bunch of disciples up there, and He picked 12 of them. And he said, as a matter of fact, He took further. He recognized in them their capacity to be an apostle,
right,
to be even different. And so He identified that in them, and they were all different. And He recognized that in them, and He helped identify that, and then called them to His purpose through their lives And here we are as a result.
Okay, so in that list of within the advocacy principle, it mentions meaning and purpose, meaning and purpose, meaning and purpose, meaning and purpose. Why? Why is meaning and purpose so important to a retiree?
If we don't have meaning and purpose, we have, that we've talked about often, we have some version of nothing. Some version of nothing. All the time, people speak trying to create meaning and purpose out of leisure, for example. Leisure has value, but it does not have meaning and purpose. So when we find that meaning and purpose, what is the result? What comes out of that? And what comes out of that is a passion. And out of passion comes energy. And out of energy comes creativity. And out of creativity comes the ability to listen to what God has in mind and be able to be his representative in whatever particular area that is. And so advocacy, to be able to see that, experience that yourself, be able to understand what that is, and then be able to advocate that with and in the life of others, whether it be your grandson, your neighbor, your buddy that you go to breakfast with, or the guy that you play golf with, whoever that may be, to be able to see that in them and be an encourager is part of being an advocate.
And unfortunately, we've all seen people who've lived their retirement years lacking meaning and purpose, and honestly, they die.
Matter of fact, that's not only just an opinion and an observation, but physically, the research shows that is exactly what happens. When they do the research with the one group that has a meaning and purpose and another group that doesn't, and they evaluate them, these die earlier and are happier. Now, we also, and we probably should talk about this at another time, but the fact that amongst the senior generations, loneliness being such a horrible problem, and then all the results that come from that, the bankruptcy, the divorce, it just goes on and on. And so meaning and purpose is what directs us to a life of freedom and joy rather than loneliness, earlier death, and then all the other really negative impacts that come as a result.
Well, and what's really cool, Bruce, as you've just pointed out, is that with meaning and purpose, it's another great way for us to tie in the gospel. We need to tell people where our true meaning and purpose comes from. It comes from Christ. And when we, a lot of people say, well, they're too old to become a Christ follower. I've known people who become Christ followers on their deathbed in their 80s or 90s. But how much better would it be if somebody who has never been introduced to Christ and they've just recently retired and all of a sudden they've been given purpose because they meet Jesus and all of a sudden their retirement years. I ran into a guy at a men's Bible study about a year ago. He goes, Jim, I worked my whole life. I never knew Jesus. I retired. Somebody introduced me to Jesus. Oh, how I wish I could go back and redo my work years, but I'm going to make the best out of my retirement years because I know Jesus now.
What a difference that makes. What a difference that makes. I had a conversation yesterday with another person, and I said, if there are two people doing exactly the same work, they do it just as well technically. One's a Christ follower and one's not. Is there going to be an observable difference between the two?
There better be.
And the answer is there definitely is. And the observable difference has an impact on others and is a form of advocacy, as well as opening up the conversation to be able to share Jesus and to be able to share the expectation of an eternity that is beyond belief.
And it's really if you want to be an advocate, if you want to embrace advocacy, principle number 10 of the Retirement Reformation Manifesto, to advocate on behalf of your neighbors and friends and family who don't know Christ, to let them know about Christ, there's no greater privilege. Bruce Brinesma, fantastic conversation. Ending number 10, the principle of the manifesto, of the Retirement Reformation Manifesto, advocacy. Make sure you go out and sign. Everybody sign this thing. Go out to Retirement Reformation, sign, click on the manifesto, sign it, change, start transforming your life today. Get the thing signed. Thank you, Bruce Brinesma.
Thanks, Jim. And if you become a member of the Retirement Reformation movement, in fact, one of the things that's available to you is a further study guide. So between that study guide of the manifesto and all of the podcasts that we've done, you've got a wonderful way to be able to bring some neighbors together and be able to understand what I Retire for Him really looks like.
You've been listening to I Retire for Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation, with your host, Jim Brangenberg, and of course, Bruce Brinesma, the founder of the Retirement Reformation. We're Christ followers journeying from retirement to reformation so we can ultimately say, I retire for Him.
Thanks for listening to I Retire for Him with your hosts, Jim and Martha Brangenberg, and Retirement Reformation founder, Bruce Brinesma. I Retire for Him is the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation. Most Christians tend to follow the world's pattern of rest and self-pampering during retirement. However, in your retirement, you can be focused on God's unique call to love, serve, and help others. This can be your best season of life if you take advantage of a life's worth of knowledge and experience and combine it with a greater freedom of time and money and invest it all in the generations both preceding and following you. The Retirement Reformation is encouraging Christians to find and follow God's call in all seasons and aspects of life, especially in retirement. Take time to sign the manifesto at retirementreformation.org and explore the wealth of resources available on our site. Join this movement of God and journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him. Go to retirementreformation.org.